All right, let's talk about Daggerheart, shall we? Give you my first impressions of Daggerheart, how I'm feeling about the system. We are doing a Daggerheart campaign, right? So we went through the character creation process together. We filmed that, got our first episode done, did the role playing, did the combat. So I got a good taste test of what was going on, right? What was going on underneath the hood? What was going on behind the scenes? And my initial reaction is I really like it. I really, really like it. It was really fun playing in it. But I think the best way of kind of breaking down how I feel about it is kind of splitting it up into two parts. Like, who is Daggerheart for? And then knowing who it's for, what does it do well? What do I still have questions about, or what I don't like? Right? I think that comes after. But to me personally, I know there's been a lot of back and forth about what people feel about Daggerheart or who the audience is, but to me it feels like this game is for fans of Critical Role's play style in Dungeons and Dragons. Right? Over the decades that Dungeons and Dragons has been out, culturally there have been many different ways to play. Right? And culturally, it's been influenced by many different things, right? You hear people talk about all the time, I used to play when AD&D came out or OG D&D, TSR was doing stuff, and or I stopped playing after 3.5. I stopped playing when 4.0 came out. It feels more like an MMO instead of a TTRPG. Like you'll hear that being said, that gets said a lot, right? So there's a whole bunch of different styles of play that have popped up over the decades. And because of Stranger Things, because of Critical Role, these two things blowing up at the same time and being the most prolific gateway into D&D, their playstyle is currently the most dominant, the most well-known. So for a lot of people coming into this space, they're automatically, no fault of Critical Role, thinking that this is the way the game is supposed to be played, right? There's no proper way for D&D to be played. D&D changes between every single table, every single culture, all that sort of stuff, yada, yada, yada. The culture is different at every single table, right? That's why you got to communicate with your players to figure out what you both want and if you all can accommodate each other for the game and the stories that you're trying to tell, right? But I think this current play style that is heavy on role playing, as much as it is the mechanical crunchy aspect of D&D, I think they attempted to make a game that satisfied that. Heavy role playing sprinkled with a little bit of crunch, right? Or a lot of crunch depending on level that you're at. And I think it works. I think so far from what I've played, it's somewhat hit that sweet spot, right? Because there's just certain things, personally speaking, I know this gets people riled up when you say it, but Dungeons and Dragons doesn't always reward you mechanically for role playing. Like, it's not integrally built into the system. And yes, you can say something like, oh, well, there's inspiration. Yeah, but that's it. That's it. All right. Daggerheart, with their fear and hope system and their stress system, all these different things, and all these things are things that you've seen before in other systems. Like this isn't anything new under the sun, right? However, these things are constantly rewarding you for rolling and role playing and being heavy on the narrative aspect while also benefiting the game mechanically with that fear and hope system. All right. But I think that's the audience, right? It's people who favor that style of heavy narrative, heavy role playing, but also want to get down and dirty and want to get crunchy in combat. Right. I think that is the style of play that is supported by the system thus far. But we're still in the beginning stages. All right. So all these things are subject to change. All these things can evolve over time. The culture will evolve over time, right? So let's break down more about how I feel about the game, right? And we'll start like at the character creation process. It was really simple. Man, it was really simple. And I really, one thing that cannot be understated is that I really liked that the way they handled your character's background, from their racial makeup to their abilities and all these different things. I think they did what I would have preferred, which was getting away from the old school, your race determines your stat stuff. I think that's boring and outdated and uninteresting and just as stifling as having restricted ability scores that are then tied to your background. Doesn't make it any better. It's like how they did with 2024 D&D, and then you still gotta get the Dungeon Master's Handbook to make customized versions of it. Don't get me started, all right? But I like the way that character creation's handled with this, where instead of your racial aspect giving you your stats, they give you specific things to your race that make sense. Different abilities, capabilities, resistances, all these sort of things that mechanically hold a lot of weight and will affect your character for the rest of the game. Right? Like the aspects of what my character is capable of. I'm playing a giant war wizard, right? War being their subclass and, you know, wizard being their main class, right? But them being a giant mixed in, like, I was able to very easily make the type of wizard that I wanted, which was a strong wizard who could wield a great sword but also cast spells, right? And just be this like powerhouse in melee combat and a tank while also being a wizard. And it gives you that flexibility in the character creation to do that, right? While still having certain weaknesses and stipulations that you would classically have, depending on whatever you pick. Like, I'm still a wizard, so I'm not going to have as many close quarters combat capabilities as someone who's playing a martial class. They're going to have way more capabilities. But there's so much room between the flavor that you can add and the way that the spellcasting mechanics work and their distance ranges, and then mix that in with my racial abilities. I was able to very easily come up with the character that I envisioned. That in Dungeons and Dragons doesn't quite really work the same because of how strict it is with all of those different aspects of it, right? So, with all that being said, I still think this system is good. This is a good start. I think where I get a little trepidatious is in the description of certain abilities, right? That's where things start to get a little weird. They start to get a little weird. Because if you really want to like hunker down and get crunchy about some of the ways these mechanics and stuff works, there's not a lot of rules governing certain things about the physics and how things function within the world. And it feels like in a lot of ways there is more pressure on the GM to narratively have to figure out or mechanically figure out how certain things are going to work and how certain things interact. Like, for example, I have a grapple hook, right? It's a standard part of equipment. And I was like, wait, so it says it can pull a creature towards me, but if I like shoot this at a fixture, can I then zip to that fixture? Doesn't say, right? But he was like, I don't see why not. You know, you just do it within a certain range and you can just do it vice versa as long as you're, you know, aiming at a structure that can hold your weight. Well, okay, cool. But like, that's an easy thing to rectify. But I know that as our abilities start going up, as we start getting more equipment, as we start getting more things, it's going to get a little weird, especially when some of these descriptions as a spellcaster, some of those descriptions are pretty brief and not very clear on how it works, or like the radius and the size of the effects of the spells that you're casting. And it can get a little funky. I could see it getting a little funky. So that's where you kind of have to, like, early on make a concession of like, hey, like, you're going to have to do your due diligence as a player to not give those bad faith interpretations of certain things, and try not to put too much pressure on your GM with figuring out the physics and the mechanics of certain things, because I don't believe the physics or like the rules are there governing all that. But also, part of the concession is that's just not the game for it. If you want a game that is going to tell you every single detail about what happens when you are wearing plate armor and a shield and you're also underwater, but you're in an anti-magic field and silence has been cast on you, but you still have a racial teleport and all that sort of stuff. So how do these things conflict, or not at all? But can you or can you not see within a certain range of being able to teleport? D&D's got you covered. All right, you can figure that out. But I like the fluidity and the looseness and the reliance more so on your imagination over the mechanical aspect of being able to detail out every single thing. It's like this give and take. It's this weird give and take. It's very hard to describe. All right. But initially, from the game that we played and from the character creation process, I am enjoying the game so far. It fit like a glove is the best way of saying it, going from D&D 5e 2024 into playing this, right? I think that helped a lot. And I think also, randomly, a game that helped me get into the flow and understanding what was happening was that I actually just recently did a mutual aid game of 10 Candles. And that is a game that has a similar mechanic like the Fear and Hope system in Daggerheart, where the rolls that you're making are generating a currency, right? A currency that can be used by the game master to make your life more difficult, right? But also in return, you can get make things easier upon yourself depending on how you roll, and have different elements of your character sheet that can help influence the outcome of certain rolls, right? So I think that's actually surprisingly a pretty good game for game masters and dungeon masters to get an understanding of the reciprocal nature of a game where you really need to be working in tandem to help try to carry the weight of the narrative and push it forward, right? When the dice and the mechanics aren't there enough, it's more on you, right, than the game itself to kind of push things forward in certain ways. I hope that's making sense, right? I know I'm not really speaking too mechanically about the game. I'm speaking more, I don't know if esoterically is the right word. I'm speaking more about the nature, the feeling, the vibe of playing the game, right? I think this game does have a lot of potential. I would love to see like the home brewing aspect of how, like, you know, workable it is in that regard to be able to make your own custom domains and sets. And the cards were easy to understand. The armor system and the combat was pretty easy to grasp. After about like 5 minutes, I was like, okay, I'm locked in. I get it. I know how to make combat work. I know how to make things. I know how to make things happen. All right. I know how to deal my damage. I know how to come up with strategies. However, I think it's going to be really, really interesting in combat to see how things go when you get to the later levels and how big your party size is. I think that's going to make a very, very big difference on how the feel and the flow of combat is going to be. So we'll see. We'll see. But those are just my first impressions. So far, it's living up to the hype. I'm enjoying it. I'm in a Daggerheart campaign. The first episode's about to premiere on May 20th, right? Let me double check that, make sure I'm correct. May 20th, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Translate that to wherever you live. Twitch.tv/Crit Hit Chronicles. Okay? So check that out so we can explore it together. First episode, that's going to be pre-recorded, but then the 27th we come back and that's going to be live, right? So check it out, and I mean, you'll be seeing me playing the game, and I'll be updating more of my thoughts on how I feel about the game. I think it is a good transition game for people coming out of 5e who want to try something new, want to try something different. I think it has some interesting things to offer. It's narratively very gripping. And I think it's pretty easy to learn. But then again, I may be coming from a skewed perspective because I'm someone now who is dabbling more into different systems. I'm playing, for 3 to 5 days a week or something like that, playing in some form of an actual play or a game, right? So I'm used to playing a lot. So, hey, maybe my perspective is a little bit skewed on how easy the game is to learn. So I might have to pull a couple of my friends aside who've only played Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and try to get them to go through the character creation process. And then we run like a little one shot. Let me know if that's something you'd want to see. We can see how that works. But I think that's it. Those are my thoughts. I hope that was somewhat helpful in getting you all some understanding of what the game is like. I recommend trying it out for yourself. All the playtest material should be out there to try out and for free. So I'd try that playtest material out and give the game a shot. Try it for a one shot, Set it within your campaign world that you're running as just a little one shot, a little side story, see how you like the system. I'm not saying that people should start switching this out for their D&D system or that it's a one-for-one switch out. These are 2 entirely different games that are trying to do 2 entirely different things. And I think that's really something that needs to be the main focus, is what you're trying to get out of your game, your heroic fantasy game, and determining if those systems mechanically fit the way that you like to tell stories, and not just doing it just because it's Critical Role who's involved, right? But that's it. That's my thoughts on Daggerheart. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I like it, man. I like it.